Well, Carlos, again, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Carlos Stevens. I am an animation director, animation director, writer. I've worked in commercials for a long time, transitioned into entertainment a while back and done a lot of game cinematics and developed feature films and directed television, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you've done a lot of really amazing work. I'm kind of curious, like for you growing up, did you always imagine you'd be in some kind of creative role?
You know, I think I took a little bit more of a long winding path to get here than some. You know, I reflect on Matt Damon and Ben Affleck winning an Oscar for best screenplay when they were like 19 years old or something. At 19, I was actually pursuing a career in professional skiing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very, very different. I was an athlete for a long time, and I thought that was going to be my calling. But as I think is the story with a lot of athletes, I got hurt way too many times. I tore my ACL a couple times, had a bad back injury, and just a whole host of devastating injuries that that really made me reflect on my life and decided that I needed to focus a lot more heavily on developing my brain than just using the body for decades. So I was living I bounced around. I lived in Lake Tahoe for a little while. I'd moved up to Portland or to Hood River, Oregon, actually, outside of Portland, so that I could ski at Mount Hood year round because I was still, on this bender to become a professional skier. So I was there. I was there 12 months out of the year, just practicing and training, and that's when I suffered, one of my worst injuries. And so I had decided. There was a friend of mine. I'd been shooting a lot of ski videos with my friends. And so that was where I first picked up a camera and started directing. And a good friend of mine was a tremendous graphic designer, a brilliant artist, and he wanted to get into web design. This was early 2000s. He wanted to get into web design, and he needed somebody that could program. And I was working at this little computer store in Hood River, Oregon, fixing Apple computers. I had done my certifications and was swapping out parts and things like that. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We can make a ton of money that way. So I moved to Portland, Oregon, and enrolled at the Art Institute of Portland for web design. And I got about, like a month into the program, and I was looking around at the other web designers, and then I was looking over at the film students that were having a blast and running around and like running and gunning with their cameras, and they were a lot more eccentric. And I was like, that's where I want to be. So I quit my my major after like a month or two and just switched to the film department. And then I did my undergrad there 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years, and I got my bachelor's. But for some reason, I gravitated towards animation. So I just kept filling my coffers with design electives and 3D electives and things like that, taking modeling classes and painting classes and all that stuff. I think I was the only one at the end of my school year at the end of my major that did an animated film for my thesis. So everybody else did live action films. And I can't even tell you why. I really don't know why there was never a choice. Like I wanted to do an animated film. It wasn't something that I actively thought about. And I don't know if you're familiar in Portland, there's another studio called Bent Image Lab.
Yeah, I know them.
At the time, they were an offshoot of a bunch of old Will Vinton people. So they were another stop motion studio, and I was doing an internship there to fulfill my internship at college, and they had stage space, and they had some other interns there, and art department and stuff that they allowed me to use to make my thesis. So I got a little extra support from them, and ultimately ended up making my thesis film. And that's when I kind of realized that I had a sliver of talent that could be valuable, because I started to submit it to some festivals afterwards, and it really got a lot of traction, and it went to the Student Academy Awards and was a finalist there. And so after that, I realized that was maybe more of my calling in life. And from then, my career went on this similarly winding path through commercials. I moved to Seattle and worked at a company up there doing design and live action and animation and directing a lot of commercial spots, learning how to pitch ad agencies and clients and do my own sets of boards that could sell a concept and all that stuff. And from there, I moved to New York. I got a job as a creative director out in New York at another company called Logan. And that's where I got really got my experience sort of running a company and dealing with every pitch that came through the door and directing a bunch of stuff in live action. And then my path took me back to Portland, where I got hired by Leica to work at Leica House, and then did an animated film there, and then moved to LA and pursued my entertainment career. It's my winder.
Yeah, just going back to the pitching, I'm kind of curious, like for you, what were some of the big valuable lessons with even just understanding the value of how to approach pitching your ideas, your concepts to agencies, to directors?
I feel like I got so lucky because when I moved to Seattle, there was a creative director at the studio. The studio was called Superfad, but it's not around anymore. But it was a really kind of fun, progressive studio at the time that was doing a lot of like Phantom, super slow-mo shoots. Right when the Phantom first came out, so not a lot of people were doing it. You know, it wasn't
like
quite
5,000 frames a second is like the new norm.
Yeah, exactly. And at the time, it was novel, you know. But now it's like you could shoot it on an iPhone. There was this creative director named David Viau, who I actually just had lunch with the other day. But he was just a savant. He was brilliant at pitching. Like the dude could bang out a set of boards, and I call them boards. It's like not traditional storyboards, but like, you know, 8 panels of concept art of what, you know, hopefully the spot will end up looking like. And a lot of this was live action design hybrid. So it wasn't like viz dev painting either. It was like more photo comping with 3D, you know, to ultimately achieve a result that the agency would look at and be like, okay, that's what our commercial is going to look like. So he could bang out a set of 8 frames to depict a 30-second spot in, I don't know, 24 hours, you know, if he was really under the gun, and they would look fantastic, you know. And he'd use Cinema 4D and a lot of Photoshop, a lot of photo reference and comping and stuff like that, and some lighting techniques and things. So I really learned a lot of technique from him, and like the bar that needed to be hit in terms of concept and sort of just the landscape of the ad industry to what their expectations were. So I learned a lot of the kind of the craft from him, but also the owner of the company, one of the owners, because it was a multi-studio company, Will Hyde. He had this ability to always look for new angles in terms of the conceptual component of it, you know. And so I really learned, like, there's obvious, and now as I get further into my entertainment career, there's always, you know, you're going down these pathways where you're standing on the shoulders of all this stuff that's been done before you, and your first tendency is usually to think about something that you know, right? Because that's the stuff that pops up into your head, things that are same as, right? Or, okay, we're talking about this project and there are these other 10 things before it that feel like inspirations for it. And so the trick is always to get beyond all those, well, let's just call them cliches, right? The things that have happened prior, and to find the new mashup of them or the new angle or whatever it is. So Will had this great ability to look at things and always kind of search for that new angle. And that's kind of the conceptual and the craft part of it. But man, I remember being on the phone for the first time, and nobody was doing Zoom calls back then. It was all just conference calls, you know, on those, like, the circular set top speaker.
That's right.
On little conference tables. And I remember being on my first phone call, and I was just shaking the first time I got to speak, you know. And I remember realizing later as I went, I was like, nobody is judging anybody individually. Everybody's too concerned about the way they sound personally. So and of course I was just a young whippersnapper at the time, but yeah, I mean, that's where I learned. And I think what I learned was just always to push it, you know, always to push the boundaries, you know. And I think the more I've learned throughout my career is sometimes not to overthink it, you know, that like that your first instinct, or if you really feel it, then it comes very naturally. And if you don't, and you try to force it, or you try to work too hard at it, sometimes it's just futile and it doesn't work out.
No, it's really fascinating. And I guess jumping around a little bit, you created a short film called The Alchemist's Letter, and that was narrated by John Hurt, right? Given that, like, what inspired the story for it? And can you talk a little bit about the process behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. I had done my short film in college back in Portland, and that had done very well. And then I wanted to do another one, and I hadn't started writing one. And I was talking to that creative director, David Viau, and he was actually the first one that we were just kicking around some ideas. And he's like, you know what's really fascinating? Alchemy is fascinating. And the guy speaks in this very, like, passionate tone. So I was like, you're right, alchemy is really interesting. And then he just walked away, which is what he would do all the time. this is interesting. And then he would book it into another room. And so I was kind of left with that little nugget of information. And I was like, he's right. Alchemy is really interesting. Anyway, and moving forward though, it resonated with me because my family is involved in an alchemy of sorts. My father is a PhD psychotherapist who's practiced shamanism for many, many years. And so I've always kind of been in and around ideas of shamanism, and shamanism is rooted in ancient practice, that dates back thousands of years. And so alchemy has always been sort of a part of my life. And the story is not in any way reflective of my relationship with my father, because I think some people might believe that there's some truth or nugget to that buried in there, but it's not. Actually, my father has been phenomenally committed and an available dad to me and guide my entire life. So it's sort of the opposite. I didn't have kids when I wrote it, but I always knew that I wanted to. And I've always been so committed to my work and my craft that there was this little thing in the back of my mind that always questioned whether or not I was going to be as good of a father as my own dad was, or if I was going to be absentee, or if I was going to somehow pay more attention to my work than to my own child. And so I really channeled that fear that I had deep down in a story about this idea of the currency of life, and the currency of life being, of course, in that film, the currency of life being memory rather than gold, time rather than monetary value, things like that. So that's where it came from. But it also was just such a rich landscape to play in. I was like, this is one, I've always loved magic, as long as magic is done correctly and it's not confusing or whatever. I love, I'm a huge Disney fan. I always have been.
For sure. Cool. I love that. What was the process like starting it all the way, just broad strokes, but I'm kind of curious, both coming up with the concept, but all the way through to completion, what were the typical hurdles you need to go through, especially in the beginning?
Look, for anybody trying to make a short film without finance, it's a long uphill battle, unless you possess all the craft and ability yourself, which, to get things to a level, I think these days, I think with Redshift and cinema, there are definitely ways to do it. But back then, I started writing it, and my first several drafts of it were very rough. It really took shape over time. But I was in New York when I started writing it, and I was working at Logan. And I didn't have, Logan wasn't really an animation house. They were mostly live action design. They did title sequences for films. They did the title sequence for Zombieland back in the day. They did some title sequences they did some work on Avengers, I think, at some point. Anyway, so
I'm just going to interrupt and say I was chatting with Orion Tate the other day about his Love, Death and Robots kind of mini zombies short film, if you've seen that. And
yeah.
I was referencing Zombieland for that just because I felt like it was, a different take, more of a tilt shift version of Zombieland in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Orion, I've never actually met him, but I've always been familiar with his name because Buck is in that family of production houses that does a lot of commercial work.
Yeah, we go way back, over a decade. So yeah, he's a really great guy.
I've heard he's a great guy. And my wife actually produced at Buck in
cool.
LA for a little while. So I think she's crossed paths with him. But I was in New York. Logan wasn't really a place that I could approach to do the production on it, nor did I think they really had any reason or desire to spend money on something that they didn't think represented their company for their style. So it was just me. I was just sort of left to my own devices. And I had some friends in New York that would help me out when they had some free time every now and then, doing some character design or doing a little bit of modeling or some previs, because I worked with a ton of freelancers in the area. They were always coming in and out of the studio. And so I sort of compiled this, let's call it a pitch package, if you will. It was my script. It was a handful of designs. It was some previs that I had edited together in a cut with some music. It was all quite rough, but I had some character design done. I had a couple character models done, and I just sort of piecemealed all this stuff together. And I remember distinctly. I remember this moment. I had this conversation with my mom actually, and I was back, I think, at home visiting for Christmas, and I was like, was like, I've been working on this thing for like 2 years now, and I have nothing to show for it. You know, I have no way of getting this thing made. I don't have a dime to make it, you know? And of course, being in the commercial industry, I knew how much this shit cost. I was like, there's no way I can afford to pay these freelance artists on their day rates, which are you know, deserved, but high, and hope that I could possibly make this short film. She's like, you got to stop worrying about how you're going to make it. You'll drive yourself crazy if you are constantly thinking about how you're going to make it, because it doesn't seem like there's any solution to it. She's like, you just believe that you're going to make it. That's it. Just put your energy into changing your mind, into thinking that you're going to make it, knowing that you're going to make it. And so I started doing that. And, you know, whether that's the reason why or not is left up to the universe, I suppose. But I got a call from Leica, who was looking to bring a director into Leica House, which is their short form content division that did a lot of commercial work and M&M's campaigns, and they did a bunch of title sequences for the films also. It was the old Will Vinton Studios. I'm sure we can talk about that more later, but they wanted me to come out badly enough that I showed them my materials, and they actually wrote it into my contract that they would help me get it done.
That's great.
And they were looking for, it was just serendipity, because at the time they were looking for animated ideas. I think they had some grants through the state and some other things like that through the Oregon Film Board that would help them make stuff like this, to showcase the talent of the 3D artists that were working at the studio and to be a portfolio piece and stuff. And they had this like short film program. They did another one, I think it was titled The Tale of Momentum and Inertia. It was a really phenomenal, like 1 minute short film, like about the shortest short film you could possibly make. And it's brilliant. I mean, it's really funny and great. And so I was sort of the next one in that pipeline. But the story doesn't end there, because I got to Portland. I started working at Leica. It was a great experience. I loved it. You know, I had access to all the stages and everything, and I really got to learn stop motion, working with an amazing art department. And we started working on Alchemist. We got a decent way through. We got through most of the visual production of producing the shots, and then Travis Knight, who is the CEO of Leica. So Leica House had been around ever since they transitioned Will Vinton Studios into Leica Entertainment. And he'd kept Leica House because he had been an intern there once, and it was a fixture in the community. But I think at that point, he really wanted to focus on entertainment. And so he didn't have the energy to keep Leica House as part of the Leica family anymore. Or it didn't make sense to him in ways that I probably don't even know the reasons for, so I won't even try. Ultimately, the executive producers and the creative directors at Leica House ended up, I want to say, buying it from Leica and spinning it off into something that's now known as House Special. So in the middle of all that, I was caught sort of in the crosshairs, because I had a contract with Leica while this thing was getting spun off into this other entity. And they were not contractually obligated to finish my short film, but Leica was. But the production facility didn't exist under Leica's banner anymore. So I was like, so anyway, I got stuck in this really strange position where I ultimately went and had a meeting with Travis, and you know we worked out a deal where I got to keep the film in its entirety, and I got the rights to it back, because Leica had owned the rights, you know. So I got the rights to the film back in exchange for some contractual stuff, and ultimately I got to finish it on my own. So now I was in a position where I had to figure out how to get the rest done. I didn't have any voice acting, I didn't have any music, I didn't have any sound design, and there were still a handful of shots that hadn't been finished. So I took on the responsibility of finishing the shots that had to be finished myself, just comping and doing everything else I possibly could to get them done. And then I did a Kickstarter to get the funds to pay for voice talent. And that, I think we raised like $15,000, and it's a fun little part of the story. So at the time, I have agents now, which are, you know, invaluable in connecting me with other people and getting me into doors that I wouldn't otherwise be able to get into. But at the time, I didn't have any agents, and I didn't know any actors. I didn't have any way of getting in touch with any actors. And I took a trip down to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, because my parents had a friend down there. And I remember going down there, and I brought the finished picture with me, and I showed it to him, and he was like, "Oh, this is fantastic." He's like, my brother lives in London, and his wife is an agent at at one of the biggest agencies out there. And she's got a bunch of, because at the time I was really thinking about like Patrick Stewart or Ian McKellen or something like that for the voice. And it was pie in the sky's idea. And he was like, oh, I'll put you in contact with my brother. And so he just shot an email off, and I sent a link, and I got a call back from his wife, and who was friends with the agent of John Hurt. And she said, hey, send me the film. I'll show it to John. And
That's great.
Sure enough, she did. And he was like, yeah, I'll do it. So I flew out to London and recorded him, and that's all that happened. A lot of serendipity needed to happen in order for that thing to get done.
Do you feel like a lot of the time that is the case? It's timing, it's relationships, it's a bit of everything?
100%, always. I mean, I think it's probably a healthy mixture of extremely hard work, dedication, commitment, never giving up, and then if you do those things, then yes, then the relationships are the things that actually deliver all the payoffs to it. And so, I mean, most of the work, the high profile work that I've done, because I've slogged through some, a lot of stuff in my career too, but most of the high profile jobs that I've gotten have been through relationships on the back end of, having worked really hard on something with somebody that maybe didn't pan out. But because of that work that we did, because of that effort, and because we had a good time, formed a great relationship, or whatever, then down the road, this new thing came around, and it was much, much easier to get because, like in some, I won't give any specific examples, but in some cases, there have been really big projects that I've, won or been hired to do without even pitching on them because I had done something else in the past where I'd done this, I'd worked super hard on a pitch or something like that. And maybe I didn't end up winning the job, but they were really impressed with me and my style or whatever. And so then down the road, they were like, oh, actually, he's the perfect guy for this. So let's just, hire him and bring him in. So,
great.
Those failures tend to, they hurt. They always hurt. They hurt really bad when they happen. And it's, I suppose it's like relationships and breakups. It's like during the breakup, it always really painful, but then you don't realize that actually it's just opened you up for the next great thing.
That's right. And I guess just to pivot a little bit, I'd love to talk a bit about LDR3. You directed Mason's Rats for season 3 of Love, Death and Robots. How did that project come about?
So that was one of those where a relationship paid huge dividends. To track it all the way back, when I was working at Leica, in fact, the CG supervisor / art director actually, he was an art director. He wasn't the CG supervisor. He was like a CG art director, let me put it that way. Kind of split the lines between those two things. His name's Dan Casey. And I love the guy to death. We had a phenomenal relationship. He still lives in Portland. But when I moved down to LA, I remember I'd gotten my first agent, but I didn't have a manager. And he said, he wanted to put me in contact with somebody that he knew that was a manager down here. So he put me in contact with my current manager. His name's Tarek Heitman. And so I formed a relationship with Tarek, and we started working together. And Tarek put me in touch with one of his other clients, which is Axis Animation in Scotland. And so while I was sort of like reworking the fabric of my career down in Los Angeles, transitioning from commercial more into entertainment, I started working with Axis a lot on game cinematics in order to survive, and pay some bills. And not that I don't love game cinematics, I think they're phenomenal. But it was one of those things that has sort of a shorter timeline than longer format stuff. And you don't have to go through the typical process of development to get one of these cinematics done, right? Like Axis gets called for cinematic, they call me as a director, I pitch on it. 2 weeks later, you're in production and you're moving rather than toiling away for 5 years in development on something. So I'd done a bunch of game cinematics with Axis. And then they called I think it was August or September. I got a call from them, and they said they'd already done 2 Love, Death and Robots episodes. They did one on each of the first 2 seasons. They did Helping Hand on the first season, and then they did The Tall Grass on the second season. So they'd become sort of a preferred vendor, I suppose, for Tim Miller and Blur, because they knew that they had stylistic range and they had the team to pull it off potentially in a short timeline, which it really was. Because I got this call in August or September. They asked me to pitch on it. I had very little time. So I basically slapped together a pitch. This is one of those occasions that I was mentioning or referring to earlier where I had very little time. I had like a day and a half to put this pitch together. Typically in the past, I would have done I would have at one of these other studios, I would have hired some artists and some board artists, and I would have done some storyboards, and I would have done a whole song and dance to try to win a project like this. But I just didn't have the time. So I just used reference as much as I could. I felt like I had an opinion about it. I couldn't second guess it. So I just slapped it all together, and I felt it came very naturally. We'll put it that way. It came out very naturally. And I also was inspired by my grandpa. So I had a really good like through line into the tone of what I wanted it to be. And shipped the pitch off, and sure enough, I got a call back from him. I was actually in Mammoth on like a little vacation with my 3-month-old at the time. Wow. And I ended up having to, the hotel internet was terrible. So I had to go and rent they had like this little WeWork space in Mammoth. And I went in there to take the call with Tim and Jen and Jed and Victoria all for the first time. It was sort of strange. And yeah, I mean, I could tell on the very first call that they liked my pitch enough that I was probably going to get the job.
You could tell from Jed's amazing charisma. I swear, I feel like I win whenever he smiles because it's so rare.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could tell a lot of it was Tim too, though, because Tim was kind of excited and
you could count the F-bombs he threw to validate the product.
Yeah, right, exactly. The crazy thing was that Tim was like, I just want to know, you're fucked because you only have 6 months. This thing from start to finish. And I was like, holy shit. All right, well, I've been fucked before, so I could do that. I'm used to it.
That's cool. And I guess what was the experience like working with Axis as well as working with Tim and Blur? Yeah, like what were some of the big challenges on creating the project in the 6-month turnaround? Every
project is its own puzzle to solve, in whatever way, because there's always various relationships and different hierarchies of studios or agencies or whatever. So it's always a matter of managing all sides, all the way through the process. And this one, I wouldn't say it was sort of remarkably unique in any respect, but what I did find very interesting about it, and a really fun challenge, is that ultimately the show lives and breathes on the variety of what's in it, of giving different directors their own opportunity to share their voice or their vision, whatever it may be, stylistically and all those things into the series. And what's really fascinating, I don't know if that many people can quite just watching the series fully recognize this from a distance, but is that although there's all these styles, they're all connected by a very specific tone. And so even though you're sort of thrown out here to go do your own thing, you also have to make sure that you're doing your own thing, but that it then lives in the tone of the rest of the series. And so that dichotomy is I mean, obviously that's what Tim and Jen and Jed are all there to help with, when all these directors are out doing their own things, they're all there to make sure that they end up fitting stylistically, tonally into that family that is Love, Death, and Robots. And so I found, the balancing act of my own tendencies, but then like understanding also Tim's tendencies and understanding Jen's tendencies and understanding Jed's tendencies, and understanding the Axis team's tendencies, and like getting all those things to synthesize together was I don't want to say it was hard. It was fun. It was a fun challenge to deal with.
Cool. Oh, that's great. That's really cool. And yeah, I think that's the fun part, is to be able to collaborate with so many different creative teams, because obviously Axis has a lot of amazing talent under its belt, but at the same time with tapping to Tim and Jen and everyone else as well, I think that's what makes LDR such a fun, I guess in a way, franchise, in the sense that it is a collaboration. It's a chance to bring in all these great creative minds and have fun doing something really cool, opposed to one long form project you're tied to for 3 years or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always found, because working in entertainment, things can take forever, right? Like there's this slog of entertainment. And so I remember in the past when I was working in commercials, I always envied the entertainment world. And I was like, oh, they get to make these long form projects and they get put so much work and effort into it. And I'm just somewhat of I suppose I'll use the word perfection. I like to make sure things are of the highest quality bar I possibly can, you know, in my work. And so I'm sort of relentless in my pursuit of getting there, as long as it doesn't, you know, absolutely kill anybody. But but then having worked in entertainment, there's this, you know, you spend so long, and I've mentioned this multiple times now, you spend so long working through development and things like that to try and get to production that you start to look back and you start to envy the commercial world, where it's like bang, 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 you know, you pitch on something, the money comes in, you start making it, a couple days later, you go through the process of all the different stages of production, from storyboarding to visual development to getting things into CG and doing modeling and blocking and animation, layout, all that stuff, effects. And so you start to look back and you're like, oh, I kind of miss doing those things on a daily basis, and that kind of like run and gun culture. So the 6 months, although it was extraordinarily short, and I remember taking one of my very first meetings with Jen at Blur. And we were just like, I think maybe it wasn't my first meeting, but maybe we were reviewing our first reel or something like that. And Emily Dean, one of the other directors from Very Pulsing Machine, was there. And she had just wrapped. She had just wrapped her episode and had been working on it, I think, for like 2 years or something like that. Sure, wow. I think hers was quite a long one. But I remember thinking at the time, oh crap, like these directors are finishing their episodes, and I'm like just getting started. I've got this super fucking short timeline. That although it was a short timeline, I think the benefit of it is that you just have to go. Like there's no time for everybody to sit around and try a million different things because somebody doesn't think that, somebody has an opinion that, oh, maybe something else is better. Like it just eliminates so much of the hassle of stuff that you do deal with in development, where there's a lot of second guessing and questioning everything all the time, sometimes to a detriment, right? Because it's like, well, if we just continued down a path, you know, we would end up with a result rather than continuing to spin on something forever. So I think it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. You know, people definitely lost some sleep on that project. I'm not going to lie and paint it in any other way, but I think at the end of the day, they're all really proud of what it is, and I'm sure it will do great things for people's confidence and people's careers and all kinds of things in terms of what they put out into the world. So, you know, even though there was some sleepless nights, I think at the end of the day, there was a lot of value that came from having to just get it done on a six month timeline.
It's a passion, you know, like we all signed up for this. I guess just to respect your time, I got one last question, which would be what's next for you? Like, what are you currently working on that you can talk about?
Well, I've a feature film in development that's been in development for several years at Warner Brothers. It's called Zero. I can't talk about the concept at all, but I think it's a spectacular script and story, and we've got some incredible visual development and animation tests. And so I'm doing that with Animal Logic in Australia and Sydney and in Vancouver. And that's, I can't say enough wonderful things about them and pursuing that film. Hopefully that gets greenlit sometime in the near future. I'm also starting work on a mini series at Paramount Plus and Nickelodeon that I'm executive producer showrunning. And I also probably can't mention what that is, but I can probably say that it's a beloved, a large, huge, massive beloved franchise. So I'm really excited about that one. I think that's going to be phenomenal. Pitching a feature with my writing partner, actually, his name's Mark Hames. Fantastic guy. He wrote Kubo and the Two Strings, and the writer on Nimona, amongst a bunch of other animated projects. But the two of us are co-writing a script that we just took out to pitch, actually, with Ruben. You know Ruben Fleischer? I
think I do.
Well, he directed Zombieland.
Okay, got it.
Bring back that reference. Yeah,
that's right.
Zombieland. He directed Uncharted, which just came out recently. He directed Venom, and so this is going to be his foray into animation, and it's also with Animal Logic. And so over the last few days, we've been taking that out and pitching it to studios, and hopefully that gets picked up, and we're off to the races running that thing. So those are maybe the big things. And then probably, as anybody else you talk to, you know, those 3 or 4 big things are belied
the next 10 years of your life.
Yeah. and 50 other, you know, small things or other things that I have boiling down below on the surface.
Honestly, this has been really great. And yeah, if anything, I'll make sure to link to everything in the show notes. Where can people go to find out more about you and all the amazing projects you're doing?
Probably the thing I keep probably the most up to date is my website, which is carlosstevens.com. I do have Instagram, but it probably has like 200 posts on it, half of which are from LVR. And the other half are my son.
Your two babies. No, Carlos, this has been so great. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, this has been awesome.
Great. Thank you, Allan. Really appreciate it, man.